You are not what you think. 2% of your DNA isn't even human. That portion came from a species that went extinct 40,000 years ago, and it's sitting inside your body right now. If that sounds impossible, stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at yourself completely differently. And hey, before we go further, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. Let's start. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. Scientists didn't just find traces of this DNA in a handful of people, they found it in billions of people alive right now, possibly including you. And the story of how it got there involves something far stranger than science class ever told you. DNA is the code inside every cell that makes you, your eye color, your height, the way your immune system fights off a cold. For over a century, scientists assumed this code came from one clean source: modern humans, tracing straight back to our ancestors in Africa. One species. One line. Simple. Turns out that assumption was wrong. In Arlinilil, a German scientist named Svante Pääbo started one of the most ambitious projects in genetic history. He wanted to sequence the entire genome of a Neanderthal, using nothing but old bones. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks down over thousands of years. It gets contaminated by bacteria, by fungus, by the hands of every scientist who has touched the bone since it was dug up. Most of the DNA in a 40,000-year-old bone isn't even Neanderthal DNA anymore. It's contamination. In 2010, his team finally published it. The full Neanderthal genome, reconstructed from bone fragments found in a cave in Croatia. Pääbo won the Nobel Prize for this work in 2022. That's how big of a deal it turned out to be. So what did they find when they compared that genome to ours? Neanderthal DNA wasn't sitting in some sealed-off branch of the family tree, disconnected from us. It was inside us, scattered through the genomes of modern humans across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. On average, somewhere between 1 and 4% of the DNA in non-African populations traces directly back to Neanderthals. Across the whole human species, scientists estimate that roughly 20% of the entire Neanderthal genome still survives today, just scattered in tiny pieces across billions of different people. Now, who exactly were these Neanderthals? Forget the cartoon version, the hunched-over caveman with the club. That image is almost entirely wrong, and it's wrong for a strange reason. The very first Neanderthal skeleton scientists studied closely belonged to an elderly individual with severe arthritis. His curved spine became the template for how every Neanderthal was drawn for the next century. The reality looked very different. Neanderthal brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They built fires, used complex tools, made clothing from animal hides, and lived successfully through Ice Age conditions that would kill most. Modern humans, without serious technology, there's evidence they buried their dead deliberately, sometimes with objects placed alongside the body. There's evidence of care for the injured and disabled. Skeletons showing individuals who survived for years after injuries that should have been fatal, meaning someone was feeding them, protecting them, keeping them alive. They weren't a failed draft of humanity. They were a fully successful species, thriving across an entire continent for over 300,000 years. And then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. The DNA evidence suggests it might have been a combination of disease, climate change, and conflict with incoming modern humans. But one piece of that answer turned out to be far more intimate than anyone expected. Here's where it gets stranger. When modern humans began migrating out of Africa, somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years ago, they didn't walk into empty land. Neanderthals were already there, spread across Europe and the Middle East. Having lived in those regions for hundreds of thousands of years longer than modern humans had even existed as a species. Two different species of human, standing face to face for the first time in history. And what happened next wasn't just conflict. It was something far more intimate than anyone expected. The DNA evidence is undeniable. Humans and Neanderthals had children together. Not once, as some rare accident, repeatedly, over thousands of years, in different regions. Every time the two populations cross paths, scientists can actually pinpoint roughly when this happened, by measuring how Neanderthal DNA segments have broken apart and recombined over generations. Researchers estimate the major period of interbreeding happened somewhere between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago. Those children survived, grew up, had children of their own. Generation after generation, that Neanderthal DNA kept getting passed down, diluted a little more each time, but never fully erased. So by the time Neanderthals disappeared as a separate species, species, they hadn't really disappeared at all. Pieces of them were still walking around, just hidden inside us. Now, here's something that might surprise you even more. If your ancestry is fully African, with a line that never left the continent, you'd likely carry very little of this Neanderthal DNA. Possibly none. Neanderthals never lived in Africa. They only existed in Europe and parts of Asia, so populations that stayed in Africa simply never had the opportunity to mix. But if your ancestors migrated out of Africa at any point, through the Middle East, into Europe, into Asia, eventually into the Americas, there's a strong chance you're carrying a small but very real piece of a different human species right now in your own genome. East Asian populations tend to carry slightly more Neanderthal DNA than European populations, somewhere around 20% more on average. Scientists think this might be due to a second wave of interbreeding that happened, specifically along that migration path. And this isn't some dead leftover trace with no effect. This DNA is active, doing things. Right now, in your body, some surviving. Neanderthal genes are linked to how your immune system responds to viruses and infections. Neanderthals had already been living in Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Before modern humans arrived, their immune systems had already adapted to local diseases. When modern humans interbred with them, they essentially got a head start, borrowed immune defenses against threats they'd never encountered before. Other Neanderthal-derived variants are connected to skin tone, hair texture, even how your body processes fat in cold climates. In early Arlene, researchers identified a Neanderthal gene variant on chromosome 3 linked to more severe reactions to certain respiratory infections, including COVID-19 people. Carrying this variant showed a notably higher risk of severe illness and hospitalization, a trait inherited from a species that vanished 40,000 years ago, still quietly shaping how some people's bodies react to a virus that didn't even exist until the last few years. There's also a research linking Neanderthal DNA to depression risk, to blood clotting tendencies, even to whether someone is more likely to be a morning person or a night owl. Sit with that for a second. A species we used to draw in textbooks as primitive, doomed to be replaced by superior modern humans, actually mixed with us, reproduced with us, adapted alongside us, and then handed down pieces of itself that still operate inside billions of living people right now, today. They didn't lose, not completely. They became part of us. Here's a detail that makes this even stranger. Neanderthals weren't the only ones. Around the same time modern humans were interbreeding with Neanderthals in the West, a separate group was interbreeding with an entirely different ancient human species further east called Denisovans. We barely have any Denisovan skeletons, just a finger bone and a few teeth found in a Siberian cave, but their DNA survives prominently in modern populations across parts of Asia and the Pacific Islands. Some indigenous populations in Papua New Guinea carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, which means depending on your ancestry, you might be carrying genetic fragments from not just one, but potentially two different extinct human species, picked up at different points in different parts of the world by your own ancestors tens of thousands of years ago. So here's the question sitting underneath this entire video. If you carry genes from another human species, genes shaping your immune system, your traits, even your sleep patterns, are you still simply human? Or are you something blended? Something that's never been just one thing? Science doesn't have a clean answer for that, because biology was never as clean as we were taught. 2% of your DNA isn't human. It's the last living trace of a species that should have disappeared completely, but never quite did. A species that walked the same earth as your ancestors, shared fires with them, raised children alongside them, and then quietly folded itself into the human story so completely that it took scientists until Lantinlinischer to even notice. So tell me, does knowing this change how you see yourself? Drop your answer below.